There was a very famous, and I'm sure you're familiar with Hans Selye. His theory, as you know, was that stress causes disease through the body's response to stress. So the illness is caused by the body defending itself. And the complications of the body's defense is how stress causes disease. And that absolutely fascinated me. And I decided in my second year of medical school, having heard about that, that's what I was going to work on. And I've worked on it for the rest of my life. Actually, 1924 was the year that the U.S. government passed two important immigration bills. The Asian Exclusion Act,
Yes.
which prevented all Asians of all tribes from becoming citizens. And the second was the one that excluded all people of Middle European descent, Greeks and Italians, to the proportion of 2% per year of the population present in the United States in 1890.
Wow.
When there was virtually no migration.
And you know what also happened in 1924? They finally gave Native Americans in America the right to vote. That occurred in 24.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's right. That's when they passed it. Not till then, 1924. So the reason we're talking about 1924 is I have Seymour Reichlin here, and Seymour is was born in 1924. And so you get the honor of being, so far, my oldest guest on the Art Dealer Diaries.
Well, I'm honored.
I'm hoping that we'll have you back once a year, every year. Now, let's see, who would have been in 24? Harding was elected. Is that when, was he the president then?
I wasn't old enough to know.
Yeah, I think Calvin Coolidge lost, and it was Harding that came in 24. And so you were, and you grew up in New York, is that right?
That's right, yes.
So one of the funny things about this interview is, so you've brought some things for me to sell in the past, Native American stuff.
That's right.
And I knew you were a physician, but I had no idea how world-renowned a physician you really are. You are, I know, yeah. You can't even make that face, because I did my research. I listened to your tape that you did. I think it was on the video on Immunological Society, maybe, in 2010.
Well, and it would be endocrinology.
Endocrinology, yes, that's right. Because you're a specialist in hypothalamic diseases.
That's right. That's right.
And also you're very interested in psychosomatic causes of the stress.
Disease,
Yeah,
stress, yeah.
Yes. And you were really one of the first persons to ever do that.
Yeah, no, I wasn't, but I got very interested in stress very early on when I saw my own father getting sick from being stressed out. And that I had always wondered how stress induces disease, chronic disease. And I saw it in him. He had severe heart disease, and I could see that he got into an angry state. He started having chest pain, and it was just so clear.
And he was an immigrant, right?
Yes.
He came in 1905. Is that when he immigrated?
That's right.
And where did he come from?
From a small town in Russia.
In Russia. And so in 1905, why did he leave Russia? Do you know?
Yes, definitely. This was a very bad time. The Tsar had decided that they were going to remove all the Jews from the little villages in Russia. And if you saw Fiddler on the Roof,
right,
with the Cossacks coming in and driving the people out, that's what was happening. And there were widespread pogroms. And so he felt he could not stay.
And he was Jewish, clearly.
Yes.
And so he left, and how old was he when he escaped?
He came to the United States when he was 16 years old. And then shortly thereafter, as soon as he was 19, he went into the U.S. Army and served in World War I.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I have his naturalization papers from when he was a GI. It's really interesting. That's what you did in those days.
Yeah. Well, I think most people don't realize the amount of immigration that occurred. I studied Maynard Dixon, so one of the things that I look about is his New York time frame. And on April 17th of 1907, 11,000 people entered through Ellis Island in one day to immigrate to America.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Isn't that interesting how many people were coming through?
That's
we didn't think much of it at that time. So he was in World War I.
World War I.
And did he enlist in, 1917?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have his naturalization papers, but I don't know it. I don't know that detail.
And what did he do in the military?
Well, he was working during the whole war in the camp in Alabama, and they assigned him to the Baker's thing. So he was doing. He was one of those guys making meals for the GIs.
Wow.
His whole life, and so that when he got out of the Army, that's what he went into, the business of.
Oh my gosh! So he must have been maybe 28 when he was in the military, something like that.
Oh no, it was early.
Was it? 'Cause
I think he was born in the probably 1883 or 84. I can't tell you exactly when.
And so. Yeah, my grandfather was a barber on a battleship in World War I. Both of them doing the jobs that needed to be done.
That's right.
And so he stayed in the military for how long? Just as long as the war went on?
Well, I know he was just at the 1918.
He did get out.
He got out. Yeah.
And obviously he survived the pandemic Spanish flu.
That's right.
Yeah. Did you have did that ever come up in conversation about the flu? Because it killed 3 to 5% of the world's population.
No.
I mean, he lived through it.
They lived through it. He and my mother both lived through it. Yeah.
And what do you think about what's going on now?
It's very difficult because of the world is so much more mobile now than it was, and the Spanish flu was at a time when we had no mobility like that. But as everyone knows, our own influenza is more fatal than coronavirus appears to be.
Right.
However, there are so many countries that are unprepared to deal with this amount of disease. And if it gets out like Iran or Africa, they simply couldn't cope with the big epidemic like that. If it got to India, that would be really difficult because they can't even cope with their ordinary everyday diseases,
right.
Much less an epidemic like coronavirus.
And the COVID-19, which is the coronavirus, it has like a 2% mortality, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and as Americans, should we be concerned about?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, because our healthcare system is
really so much better.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So things have come full circle.
Right.
Since when your dad was alive. And so he becomes a baker. Your father becomes a baker.
And then he goes into the restaurant business.
Uh-huh. And where was this?
In New York.
In New York City?
New York City, yeah.
And
he worked for the rest of his life. And when I graduated from high school, I went to work for him for a year because I was too young. I was only 15. So I got an idea about that business, and I learned two things. One, I was not going to be in that business. And two, I learned how not to manage people because he was a terrible boss.
In what respect?
He criticized people publicly in front of other employees, in front of customers, and I could see his employees cringe.
Yeah.
And I knew that he was doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Did he do
and
that?
He was a nice guy, but he didn't understand how damaging that is to morale in an organization.
Do you think part of that was language issues?
No.
You think it was him?
It was just him.
Yeah, and so he must have treated you that way in some respects, right?
No.
No, he did not?
No.
Yeah.
No.
It was just almost like a caste system.
That's right, yeah.
And so because you went to a high school that was a technical high school, correct? A science
It was a science high school.
Yes.
It was at that time the only science specialty high school in New York, Stuyvesant High School. It's still one of the most distinguished high schools now in the country.
And you had to apply for that, I assume?
No, in those days, they just took you in on the basis of your academic standing in elementary school.
Yeah, and you were a smart
and
kid.
junior high, and so got good grades, so you got in. But now you have to take an exam.
Uh-huh.
And of course, this is a very interesting story because the exam is highly competitive, and a disproportionately large number of Asian students are now going to Stuyvesant, and it's extraordinary. Asian students, Chinese and Indian, make up only 11% of the population in the elementary schools in New York. But the Asian population at Stuyvesant High School is 70%. So there's almost a sevenfold step up. And it's similar to what you're seeing now with Harvard and Yale and other Ivies.
I wonder how many of those are first-generation immigration families.
Probably a high proportion.
I would think.
Yes, and I read an article that said that in the Chinese news media, advertisements are rent an apartment in New York near Stuyvesant High School.
And that's where you went to school.
Yeah, but that's where I went, but I had to take the subway.
Yeah. And where was your mom from?
They came from the same town in Russia.
And did she come over on the boat at the same time in 1905?
No, they came over differently. And see, my father never went to school here. He learned to speak English in the Army. And my mother graduated from 6th grade. And that's the two of them. That's their
college. Yeah, that was their education.
That's how much they educated.
And that 6th grade education, was that in Russia or was that
in the United States?
In the United States. So she came over fairly.
She was young when she came over.
Yeah. And then they got married in what year? Do you know? I know it's a tough question even for anyone.
It's soon after the end of the war.
Yes.
First World War.
And
well, it had to be because I was born in 1924. So.
Didn't have to be, but in those days, probably.
In those days, yeah.
It probably was. And did you have other brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have an older sister and a younger brother. And my younger brother is only a year and a half younger. He and I were both, he went in the Army in the Second World War a year after I did. He's only a year and a half younger, and he was badly hurt in the Battle of the Bulge. Lost an eye, part of his head, and but he's managed a good life ever since, and he's 94.
And he's still going.
Still going.
And he was in the Battle of the Bulge.
That's right.
Wow. What was his job?
He was a machine gunner.
Wow. And did you ever talk about that with him?
Yes, it's been still emotional when he talks about it, because the two men he was with were killed, and he himself was unconscious for 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Wow. Yeah, I don't think you recover from that.
Yeah, and he still remembers that.
And what did he do? What did he do for his life?
He went to college. He got majored in mathematics, became a computer guy, and for a period of time he was running the computer system for healthcare in the state of Pennsylvania. And then when he retired from the state system, he went to work for the federal government as a consultant in computer programming. He actually helped revise the computer system at Fort Huachuca, which is an amazing that he made it all those years.
Yeah, that is amazing.
And he got married, and he had 6 children.
Yeah.
Besides all that.
And your sister, is she still with us?
No, she died at age of 61 of a rare neuroendocrine cancer of the pancreas, similar to the one that Steve Jobs had.
Interesting.
Of all things that I was actually a specialist in.
Yes, and there was nothing you could do.
Not at that time.
Yeah,
no.
that was a long time ago, obviously.
Yeah.
She was your older sister.
Yeah.
So you grow up in New York City. What was New York City like? And, you're there, you're born in 24, you're there till 19 40. So what was that like in New York at that time?
I don't know. It was fine. It was a good place to grow up.
Uh-huh.
We lived in an apartment house just off of Broadway. We used to play in the park. This was before the Henry Hudson Highway was built, so you could walk right onto the west side of the. No, that would be the east side of the Hudson River. We played at the Hudson River, and the high point of my life was walking past an apartment building where there were a bunch of kids clustered around a man signing autographs. It was Babe Ruth, and he lived in that apartment.
Did you stop to?
I stopped and I said, "Wow!"
And you recognized him immediately.
Oh yeah. He was doing that, and I've cursed ever since I didn't have any paper. So.
Did you go and ever watch the games, the baseball games?
I was a Giants fan.
Yeah.
And when the Giants left New York, that was the end of baseball
for you.
Me. Yeah.
And so when you're growing up in New York at that time frame, you really you're a Depression era baby for sure.
That's right. I saw Depression close up. My father went bankrupt from his business.
When did he go bankrupt? Directly after 1930 or so?
It was in 1931.
He made
bankrupt.
It 2 years.
Yeah. And we lived in in an apartment which had access to a back alley. And I actually saw guys coming there and singing so that people would throw pennies down for them. And this was almost an Irish neighborhood. They would be singing Irish songs. My mother would wrap 3 pennies in a piece of newspaper and throw it down. And I've been to restaurants and seen people come in and beg for food. I have actually seen that with my own eyes.
Yeah.
And someone will say, "Will you give me some food? My children have no food." That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah, and your father and mother had 3 children to feed as well.
Yeah.
And so
my mother went to work.
Yes.
She opened up a fish store up in Washington Heights in New York.
Like a market?
A market, yeah. And they got by through the war.
Because of her ingenuity.
Because of her willingness to go to work. And she was also very, very bright and extremely a creative woman. And
did she do art at all?
No.
But she was a creative soul.
Well, she started her life as a milliner in the day when those fancy hats were being made.
Oh, so she was very creative. She would make the hats.
That's right, and she made hats her whole life. These big fancy old-fashioned hats.
Do you have any of them?
No.
Yeah, too bad. And so when your mom's opening this fish market, did she have any idea? I mean, how did you do that? How do you
She just saw that was a possible way to get by.
Yeah, she'd get fish from the
Fulton Fish Market downtown. My father would go in a taxi and bring up boxes of fish, and they would sell it in this store.
And did that continue?
They did that for 3 or 4 years. And then my father was able to go back into business, and he stayed there.
And was he able to actually open his own business again?
Yes.
Yeah, so he went after it again.
Yeah.
As a baker. He opened another
restaurant.
A restaurant. And how long did he do that?
Well,
till his death?
Probably in the 50s, late 50s. And then he retired.
So he did actually get to retire. But he died younger?
He was 73 when he died. Yeah. He had coronary artery disease, and there was no treatment for it in those days.
Yes. And so when you're growing up in New York, there's a lot of art and art museums. Were you influenced, or did you go look at art?
Very much. I lived within walking distance of the American Museum of Natural History.
Nice.
So that I don't think there was a Saturday that I didn't walk to the museum. and I knew every little spot in the museum. And I graduated very young from high school. I was only 15, but I started college at CCNY, and in that 1 year, would go down to a settlement house in the Lower East Side and give talks to children about nature. And I got my slides, those great big old-fashioned lantern slides,
Yes.
from the American Museum of Natural History. They allowed me to borrow the slides for those talks, which was very interesting.
And did you think about becoming a biologist at that time?
Yes. I was interested in biology immediately, as soon as I found out about, well, the birds and the bees.
Yeah. But you graduated high school at 15, so that's in 1939-ish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then World War I starts in 41.
That's right.
And you're in college at that time?
I'm in college at that time, and I finished 2 years of college and go into the Army.
And you were studying medicine in college?
I was already a pre-med at that time.
And so you had 2 years in the college, and then you didn't get drafted.
Everyone was drafted, but I enlisted because I was hoping to go to officers training school because I had been in the ROTC.
And 2 years of college.
That's right. But I didn't, as soon as I told them that I had had experience working in a mental hospital as an undergraduate, that was bingo.
You're an orderly. You're a medic.
I'm a medic.
And which branch were you in?
In Medical Corps. I was assigned immediately. I mean, within a week of getting in the Army, I'm on the train to Denver to go to be an orderly in the psychiatric ward of Fitzsimmons General Hospital.
Wow. And what year would have that been? Is that 42? 43?
Yeah, that would be 42 or 43.
Yeah. So you're young. You're 18, right?
No, I was 19. 19.
And you're an orderly. So you're a PFC. You're a private.
And I never got out of being a private.
And that had to be. I worked as an orderly in college in a mental.
Where was that?
That was in Las Cruces. Yeah. In the psych ward. I worked in a hospital as an orderly for 3 years, ICU, ER, but also I worked, when they needed me, I'd go into the psych ward because, they needed strong men for one thing. And so what was that experience like?
Well, that was very important. See, I'd gone to Antioch, and that has a work-study program. After I left CCNY, I went to Antioch, and I went out to Ohio, but I had a series of jobs in hospitals. I worked as an orderly in an eye operating room, and then I spent 2 sessions as an orderly at what was then the leading private psychiatric hospital in America, the Butler Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. So I was very experienced, and at this time I have to emphasize there were no medications.
Yeah, none.
For treatment of psychiatric illness, and we were treating depression exclusively for electroshock therapy. And when I got into the Army and was stationed in Denver, we were seeing hordes of GIs coming back from the Japanese theater who had actually gone crazy. And it wasn't what you're now calling battle fatigue or
shell shock.
Shell shock. But many of these guys were actually what I would now realize were acute schizophrenic episodes.
Yeah, it caused them to break, really.
And they broke, yeah. And it was very scary. And it got me interested in mental illness very, very early in my career. Long before I went to medical school, I was already thinking about mental illness.
And what caused it, right? Really, was that
and what caused it?
Yeah. Because you're dealing with strong young men that have a loss of sense of reality. That had to be physically scary, somewhat.
Yeah, it was very scary, and we had there were no drugs. Thorazine had been invented and had been used slightly, but there were no other drugs. And so we used physical restraint, bathtubs, put people in showers, and talk to people. That's all you had.
And you're what, 5'6"?
And well, at that time, I was 5'9". I've shrunk.
Yeah.
But I was 5'9", but I only weighed 137 pounds.
Yeah.
And so I was a skinny little guy, and I was dealing with some of these great big GIs who were crazy.
Right, literally.
And assigned to work on the wards at night. It was really scary.
But it must have really helped you with your ability to talk to people, because
That's
you
right.
had to use your verbal skills to get them to come down, and you're dealing with people that are irrational.
That's right, yeah. But that got me interested in mental illness. But just before I went in the Army, I had applied to medical school. And while I was in the Army, I was informed I was accepted to Washington U in St. Louis.
St. Louis. That's
And
a great.
so the
I almost went there,
Army
actually.
had to decide whether to send me to medical school as in the Army,
Right.
or send me to medical school as a GI. And so I actually ended up as going to school on the GI Bill.
Yeah.
And had it not been for the GI Bill, and I am making an argument for the GI Bill. If I hadn't had the GI Bill, I could never have gone to medical school.
Yeah. They paid for mine too.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, I was a military doctor, the Navy, and when I got out, I came to the U of A and used my GI Bill here when I did my residency. Yeah, and it helped me tremendously as well.
That's right. And that was a very good investment
Yes,
of
clearly.
of the government.
Yes, look what you've done.
And yeah, look what it allowed me to do.
And I'm selling art.
That's right. That's right.
But when you finish your duty, tour of duty, you go to University of Washington. Washington University. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And in St. Louis, and you get your medical degree.
That's right.
And so, what year did you graduate from medical school?
In 48.
In 1948.
Yes, you see, we went in when I went in. The medical schools were in a state of emergency. There was a great shortage of doctors.
Why was that?
Because there weren't enough medics to cover the GIs and the home front.
Got it.
So the medical school was running all year. There were no breaks, no vacations, and so they were putting the 4-year program in 3 years. But the war ended after the end of my first year.
Mm-hmm.
So then they went back to the 4-year curriculum. I was in medical school on the day that the Japanese surrendered. I still remember that.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was really wild. It was absolutely wild.
In what respect?
I mean, everyone was just
Ecstatic.
crazy ecstatic. Yeah.
What did you think about when they used the atomic weapon?
I'm basically a pacifist, but I have to say that I agreed with Harry Truman, and for a very funny reason. Of course, 150,000 people were killed in Hiroshima alone, and many more hurt.
Right.
The Japanese were prepared to defend themselves against the American invasion, even if every single Japanese person was killed.
Right.
They were prepared to accept 2 million deaths. I don't know if you saw the film that Clint Eastwood produced. It's called Letter from Iwo Jima.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a marvelous film. It's actually, most of it's in Japanese with English subtitles. And they make it very clear that for the Japanese, surrender and not defending the emperor was worth dying for.
Mm-hmm.
So in a bizarre way, of dropping the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved millions of Japanese lives.
Mm-hmm. And Americans as
and
well.
American lives as well. So that even though it was a horrible thing, if I had been Harry Truman, And even knowing everything that happened afterwards, and even though I am a pacifist, I still would have dropped the bomb. I wouldn't have dropped 2 bombs.
Right.
But they didn't know for sure that the first bomb was going to work. So.
And did you recognize at that moment in time the power and how the world had changed?
Yes, yes.
It was that clear.
That was that clear. Of course, it's become much more clear since.
Yes. Yeah, that had to be a very, I can't even imagine what it must have been like. The exuberance of ending a 4-year war, but at the same time, this massive weapon that could potentially destroy the world.
I mean, looking back at that, you can't imagine how much hate had been engendered against the Japanese by, first of all, they had attacked us in Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And second, they didn't look like the rest of Americans. So I understand what Roosevelt did when he moved the Japanese into the internment camps. We were indoctrinated at that time. Don't trust anyone who is Japanese. It's very easy to say, oh, well, that was a terrible thing to do, and it was a terrible thing to do. But when you were living through it, it seemed like that was the right thing to do.
Which is, there had to be a dichotomy for you as well, being Jewish and seeing what was going on in Germany.
Well, there was, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, because it was, and did you feel anti-Semitic?
Anti-Semitism.
Yeah, when you were growing up?
Very much so.
I would think so.
Yeah, New York, remember, Roosevelt helped the British, the famous, allowing them to have lending them 25 cruisers, because there was so much anti-British sentiment in the United States when the war came out. Living in New York, there was a large Irish population, and they remembered how England had treated Ireland during the Great Potato Famine, which was terrible. There was a very huge German population, German descent in New York, and there was a very active group called the German American Bund in New York. And you recall that Lindbergh, our great hero,
he was
pro Russia,
yeah.
And recall that Joseph Kennedy, the father of President Kennedy, was extremely opposed to the United States helping Britain during the war. So this was not a good time. If Japan had not attacked America, if the Germans had not sunk an American ship, Roosevelt would have had a hard time declaring war against Germany.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and was it Roosevelt? Yeah, Roosevelt was elected on keep America out of the war.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson, same thing for World War I.
That's right.
And he
exactly.
was completely against it, and yet we got into that too.
That's right.
Lusitania, I believe, was the sinking
That's
of
right.
Lusitania. So when you graduate from medical school,
right,
then you do a residency at that point?
Yeah, I did. I went to a New York hospital, which is Cornell University affiliated, as an intern. Then went back to Barnes in St. Louis for my first-year residency, and then back to New York for my second-year residency, and then I went back to Barnes as chief resident in medicine.
Internal medicine.
Internal medicine.
Yeah.
So I had 4 years of clinical training, but I had already gotten interested in neuroendocrinology while I was still in medical school. I'd done some research on that, and had already decided that was what I was going to do, but it wasn't clear that it would be through endocrinology or through what was the beginning of psychosomatic medicine.
And did they even have a residency in endocrinology at that point?
There were no, there were no boards.
Yeah, we knew nothing, right?
No. I helped create the board.
Yeah.
There were no boards in endocrinology. So I'm not board certified in endocrinology. I just was one of the people who started the board.
And have been one of the leaders in the field for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so psychosomatic interest in
how the brain influences illness got me going from the second year on. There was a very famous, and I'm sure you're familiar with Hans Selye.
Mm-hmm.
Hans Selye is the Hungarian scientist who first coined the term stress as a cause of disease.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually had an institute in Montreal. And I heard about him when I was a second-year medical student. I'd never heard about that. His theory, as you know, was that stress causes disease through the body's response to stress. So the illness is caused by the body defending itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the complications of the body's defense is how stress causes disease. And that absolutely fascinated me. And I decided in my second year of medical school, having heard about that, that's what I was going to work on. And I've worked on it for the rest of my life.
And again, you think that was partially due, or maybe completely due, seeing your father being in a stressful job and also working in a psych ward and watching
that's right.
what stress could do to the human condition.
I'd seen it right up myself.
Yeah. And so you choose...
And I got it myself, too, because
when
I was a chief resident, I'd just gotten married, and it was really stressful. And I developed a duodenal ulcer myself. So I knew.
And did you recognize that was what was causing it?
Yeah, I didn't know what was happening to me, but there I was getting pain and so on. And there, before you know it, I had a little infant at home and new marriage and
long hours
as chief resident, and I got an ulcer. So. Man, I am positive that stress can make you sick.
And so what did you do to try to treat that at that time? Because
that's all we had. All you had was antacids.
Yeah. So, but did you yourself try to cut down your stress level?
No.
Yeah, you couldn't, right?
There was no way. I was where I was.
Yeah, but clearly living to 96 years old, you've managed to deal with stress effectively. Is that a true statement? I don't know.
I think it's just luck, Mark.
You think?
I think, because I got terrible migraines from stress, and I could have been dead long ago. So,
but you've been healthy for
I have coronary artery disease. I had a bypass almost 30 years ago.
Uh-huh. And were you watching your diet and all that kind of stuff?
Now I do.
Yeah, now you do.
Yeah. I attribute my coronary disease to Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
Do you still have some?
Not anymore.
Yeah, you're very good about that. Yeah, you came into my gallery and said you had a picture you wanted me to sell, and you said, well, we do have to plan for the future, I guess.
That's right.
And so you get very interested in this field. Are you looking at art at all at this time frame?
I'm looking at
art. Were you going to museums still and doing things like that?
No, I didn't.
Or you were just laser focused?
No, I didn't know anything about art, and I didn't know anything about music.
Yeah. But you did get a PhD as well, didn't you?
Well, after I finished my clinical training, I was able to get a PhD at the University of London, working as a fellow in London with the man who is probably the most famous neuroendocrinologist in the world. He is sometimes called the father of neuroendocrinology. That's a man named Jeffrey Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And
he died young, right?
He died, yes. He was a chronic alcoholic. He died of complications of liver disease at a very young age, which is too bad. He would have won the Nobel Prize for sure, because other people who followed him and proved his theory won the Nobel Prize. But he died young, but he was a very charismatic man. I worked at the University of London division at a psychiatric hospital in London, the Maudsley Hospital. The Maudsley Hospital was named after a famous psychiatrist, but it used to be called the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, and the English pronunciation for Bethlehem is Bedlam, and that is why it used to be called Bedlam, and that is why the term Bedlam
Yes.
refers to what it was like to be in a psychiatric hospital.
I did not know
in
that.
those days,
Yeah.
before there was
Complete bedlam.
any trouble. So Bedlam is Bethlehem.
Bastardized to Bedlam.
That's right.
And you worked in that hospital.
And I worked.
Was it Bedlam?
No, I worked in the labs.
Yeah, in the labs. Yeah, because you were interested in research.
Because I'd already done a lot of clinical work.
And did you see yourself at that point as being a research scientist
Yes.
more than a clinician?
Yes, I was actually a very good clinician, but I wanted to try to combine research and clinical medicine.
And do you think that is because you saw a greater good that you could do as a research scientist?
Both. I actually also, being a depression kid, born in the Depression, I wanted to retain my clinical skills because I knew if I didn't make it as a researcher, I could always be a real doctor.
Yeah. No, I understand that. My father, who was a depression era baby, was like, don't get rid of your license, son, when you're an art dealer. Yeah, he said, keep it. And I did. Yeah, because you just, that's ingrained, I think, into your psyche.
That's right. Yeah, and so and I definitely think that's a legacy of the insecurity of seeing your dad lose his job. And,
yeah.
And also, that being a scientist is it's hard to achieve, and you want to have something you can be sure about.
Did you have any hopes or dreams of Nobel Prize kind of stuff?
No.
I assume most research scientists really don't even think about those kind of things.
No.
I mean, my dad was a research scientist as well.
What was his?
He was an entomologist, ichthyologist, so he was he did taxonomy. He described over 150 new species to the world of chironomids. So, and
see, that's a great achievement.
Yeah, it was for him and for the world. And
was he in New Mexico? Was he at the University of New Mexico?
He was in Eastern New Mexico University, Portales, is where I grew up.
Oh, Eastern.
in
This
Portales.
was in Portales. Now, what's the one that's in Silver City?
Western.
Oh, that's Western.
Yeah. So I understand these, having a father as a research scientist and talking to you, there's things that you were probably always trying to get grants. That was the big...
Oh, yeah. You're always trying to get grants.
And you live and die by the grants, really, pretty much.
That's right. And, when I started out, it was almost impossible to get fellowships. There was no NIH program. And I was lucky to have a good political connection through the faculty at Washington U, and I was able to get a Commonwealth Fund fellowship, which was set up by the Harkness Foundation to promote better understanding between England and the United States. And so because I knew people who knew people, I was able to get support to go to England. But those were very hard jobs to get.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. And similarly, coming back to the United States, I continued as a research fellow because people who I knew were willing to try to get me fellowship support. And then I got onto the academic ladder and eventually was made head of a psychosomatic division at Washington U, and then was able to become associate professor at Rochester, the University of Rochester, and get up the academic ladder that way.
And you also were published many times in the New England Journal of Medicine, right?
That's right, yeah. Yes, the field I was in was pretty much not known in the United States. And so I had the opportunity to write probably the first review of neuroendocrinology that got any attention at all in the United States.
Wow.
And once I got that, then I started getting invitations to give talks, and then write chapters for textbooks and so on. That's once you need a little push up. And again, the people who Your sponsors, the people who encourage you and help you, they get you started. And if you don't have that, it's hard.
Well, for people who don't know, because we mainly talk about art, but science interests me as well. New England Journal of Medicine is like the premier magazine. It's the one that all dream, and the one that all students and doctors read.
That's right.
And I have an interesting story about the New England Journal of Medicine. Was when I got really interested in art and not so much in medicine, I noticed by my bedside that the big levels of books that were medicine related, and a lot of them were New England Journal of Medicine, I was leaving them in their little plastic holders and not opening it up, and I was focusing on art books. And the number of those got smaller and smaller, and the art books got bigger and bigger. And that's really I said, I'm clearly not as interested in medicine as I
Well, when was the last time you actually practiced?
Well, you saw me do it, 2 minutes ago before we got here?
Well, I know that, but I mean,
professionally. Professionally, that's a very good question. Well, I kept my license until like 4 years ago. So
really?
I kept it a very long
Really?
time. Yeah,
Really?
5 years ago maybe.
Well, now, didn't you have to get continuing medical
I had to do
education
all that
credits?
stuff. All that stuff. Yeah.
And you kept up with that?
I did. You know why? Because my father was a Depression-era baby, and he said, "Do not get rid of your license." And I told him I wouldn't. And after my father passed, and I said, "Okay, I can let it go."
See, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
yeah.
But what I was able to do with some of the CMEs, which worked out nicely, is that they would have me come as a lecturer, and I would talk about Navajo textiles and other things. I'd be a keynote speaker because all the doctors wanted to hear how I got out of medicine. And so I would get my credits, get paid, and get to talk about what I love. And to a bunch of doctors ago, I wish I was doing what you're doing.
Well, see, that's really interesting. And that brings us back to this, a really major topic, because, I'm working on this article of the healing art as a healing technique.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I'm interested in, and you're interested in.
Very much so.
And so I'm going to turn tables on you and ask you how art heals.
Well, it does. Yeah, it's in many ways. I mean, we helped start the group that does for TMC. Are you familiar with their art and healing program?
No.
Yeah, so TMC actually, that's Tucson Medical Center, has a art and healing program where they have a curator of art, and you can donate art to the hospital, and it's in all the rooms, it's everywhere. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we're trying to do some other hospitals with this as well, because there's lots of art out there that needs to find homes. And there's nothing more healing, in my opinion, as being in a hospital and you have a beautiful flower or scene or something that stimulates your mind or gets your mind away from the problems or the disease elements you're having, and you're back into that place, as well as comfort. You feel like you're in home. You don't feel like you're in an aseptic room, that's unhealthy in that aspect. So I'm very interested in that.
So you're doing that?
Yeah.
Well, are you familiar with the classic study of the tree in healing? Do you know that?
I don't think so.
This is a very famous story. The theory was that if people could have a view of nature,
Mm-hmm.
they would heal quickly. And so they did a study of how long it takes to be recovered from an appendectomy.
Mm-hmm.
And the experiment was that in one setting, the window of the patient's room looked out at another building, brick wall.
Mm-hmm.
And in the other, the window looked out at a tree. Okay? And the evidence was that the people who had a tree to look at got out of the hospital quicker.
Totally believe that, 100%. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's a program at the University of Arizona now that Esther Sternberg is running, which is about the role of environment in efficiency at work and in healing. And they even have a joint program between the University of Arizona Department of Architecture and the medical school about it's called the Healing Space. Are you familiar with this program? You know, it's very good. And Esther Sternberg has written a book called Healing Spaces, which refers to the importance of the environment in making people get better.
Yeah, it just makes sense, right? I mean, it again relates to the thing that you're a specialist in, which is stress, right?
That's right.
You know, if you're in a bad situation, at least for me, or I think of an environmental situation where I was happy, the sun's shining on me, I can smell the ocean, there might be music that I see, and it immediately lowers my stress level. So why wouldn't we think that would work, you know, in a hospital setting if you can set it up, or any setting, quite frankly? I mean, what's the first thing we always want to do when we buy a house? What's the views? Yeah.
That's right. That's your most important criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, living in a city crowded, with no view, backyard, window, it constricts your soul. Let me put that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. And now you did some very interesting research and help. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.